Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? My name is Monica. I'll be your host tonight. I work at Booklyn, and you are watching the 8th episode of My Favorite Book, which is an original program of Booklyn Inc. We're about to hear from Candace Hicks, who's going to present their favorite book that they've ever made, and I'm so excited. I caught a glimpse of it before we jumped on, so I can just tell you it's going to be really great. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the land from which we're broadcasting is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape people. Please join us in acknowledging the Lenape community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. So Booklyn Inc., we're a nonprofit located in Brooklyn, New York. We're celebrating 22 years of promoting artist books as primary research, as art, and as tools for social justice. We distribute work by artists and organizations within the academic market. We host workshops and exhibitions, and we publish books and archival box sets. We're really excited to be doing our first serialized online program called My Favorite Book. This is a program where we ask 18 different artists to quickly tell us about the favorite book that they've ever made. Every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday throughout the entire month of June, we'll have a new episode for you every night, 7 to 7:30. You can check out our website for a full schedule, or you can drop in any night on YouTube Live. Here's the information that you can use to do that, to connect with us. And lastly, I just want to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for supporting My Favorite Book. Thank you. Okay, so tonight, let's dive in. We are delighted to introduce Candace Hicks. She's going to present the book, which is called The Case of the Isolated Seamstress. I'm going to read a quick bio of Candace's, and then I'll hand it over to her. She's going to talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll do a brief Q&A. If you have questions or comments for Candace, and assuming you're on YouTube Live right now, you can put them in the chat. And then I'll channel those to Candace afterwards. Candace Hicks collects coincidences from the books she reads and gathers them in her artist books and explores them in her installations. Her compendiums of coincidence are records that show the world through a particular, specific, sometimes obsessive point of view. She's an associate professor at Stephen F. Austin State University, where she teaches foundational courses in two-dimensional media. Her work consists of artist books, video, performance, printmaking, and drawing. Books from her Common Thread series are in more than 80 collections around the world, including Boston Athenaeum, Deutsche Nationalbibliothek, the Grolier Club, Harvard University, the Hungarian Multicultural Center, MIT, MoMA, Museum of Applied Arts, UCLA Biomedical Library, Stanford, and Yale. So without further ado, Candace.
Hi.
Hi, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk about The Case of the Isolated Seamstress. When Booklyn asked me to consider this project of my favorite book, I initially was really excited because I make my work about literature, and the first thing I thought of was that, I'll get to talk about my favorite book, which is Pale Fire. And now I'm going to have to change my my security question, because I always use that one. So first, I have to make a plug for Pale Fire, excellent novel. But since I have to talk about a book that I've made, I'm going to talk about The Case of the Isolated Seamstress. What makes it my favorite book that I've ever made? The fact that I finished it this week so that I would be ready to present it today. The number one thing that I was doing to finish the book this week was to make a case for it. The book itself is designed to hang in a gallery. And so rather than being in signatures that can be paged one by one, it's made that you can walk through it. And so the pages hang down the gallery at eye level. And so I kind of had an interesting problem of figuring out how to house it and display it when it's not hanging in a space. And so I also have a problem showing it on a screen, because this is the box for it, and I can't quite fit the whole box in the frame, but you can see that the shape of the case is slightly tipped in the middle so that it's a little bit like a lectern. And I won't go on and on about the case, but it's easy for me to hold up the pages actually because it's unbound. It hangs from these little pieces. So this is the cover piece. This composition book style cover is something that I've been using for a long, long time. I have an ongoing series called Common Threads. I believe I'm currently working on volume 139 of that series. I've been making it for about 17 or 18 years. And those are actually smaller embroidered notebooks. And that's maybe the harder thing to see too, is that this pattern is stitched. So these are stitched by hand with embroidery thread. And that's what I use almost exclusively for making books. The title page for the case of the isolated seamstress, also stitched by hand in this sort of pulp novel style. And another thing that makes this book special is that it's my first attempt at writing fiction. So as Monica mentioned, I'm always collecting coincidences from my reading, and I use those coincidences and represent them in these notebooks that are sort of like journals or collections of, or maybe like a large comparative literature project. For this particular book, I read a particular type of mystery for a given period of time. I think it was about 3 months. I only read novels that fall into the genre of locked room mysteries. If you're unfamiliar with this genre, it's the type of mystery that takes place within a room that is sealed from any outside elements. So it's sort of a mystery in its purest form. Because only the clues that are within that sealed room can be part of solving the crime. So one of the things that kept coming up in this book are all of the sort of ridiculous things that novelists include in their books, despite the fact that it's just sort of illogical. Sometimes I think when a writer is writing a book, there's not really like someone there to say, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. For instance, I have several examples of secret passages that are just stumbled upon by the police. So it's a little bit strange because it's never like explained what made the passage secret, or some of these tropes that get a little bit overused. If you limit yourself only to genre reading, you will find that they crop up a lot. And that's helpful to me because it's sort of, and it's hard to say whether they count as coincidences or not. Also, the mere idea of a coincidence, when you're reading a mystery genre, a coincidence is always a clue. So that's something to be said. I don't want to talk forever without showing more parts of the book. I'm trying not to be super awkward about this. As you can see, some of the pages have had some violence done to them. I use stitches that look sort of like handwriting on some of the pages. There are illustrations of some of the scenes that are described inside. This one might even be a little harder to see. Those are trompe l'oeil bullet holes in that page. And so I alternate the written text with copies of pages from the books. A part of the story of this book is that the reader, or the isolated seamstress, is finding that someone has been underlining words in the books that she's reading. And she discovers that these underlined words might be more meaningful and be a code that is addressed directly to her. And so, I mean, I wouldn't want to give away any spoilers if you want to read the entire book. This also has the virtue of being the longest book that I've ever created. I want to say, oh, see, now I'm going to be, I can't pause and like count the pages, but just trust me, it's the longest one that I've made. So here's another example of the underlined text. So it was kind of fun to, as a physical challenge, to see if I could reproduce typed text, or printed text rather, with thread. Kind of a little bit different from reproducing my own handwriting, which I'm really used to doing. I want to talk a little bit about why I insist on stitching the lettering in the books. I've been doing it for a long time with the Common Threads books, and I think a lot of us as artists have maybe like just a very few ideas that we keep coming back to all of the time. I particularly like the tactile quality of a hand-stitched page, but I also like the practicality of making art that I can literally fold up and stuff into my pocket. And I started making these pages when I was working as a secretary, and I needed to be able to make a few pages at a time and not sort of spread out and take over my whole workstation with my with the book that I was making. And secondarily, I like the idea that the material of the book becomes one whole when it's stitched. It's a little bit like the satisfaction of printing onto high quality paper, is that you have the sense that you're creating one new thing when something is printed really well. But I like the idea that by stitching through the fabric, it's almost like it all becomes really unified into one surface, almost like a weaving or something. So I see I just keep pulling out more and more pages. Another thing that a lot of times happens when I'm stitching a book is that I'll find that I have to cross out some of my mistakes, and those little details end up on the page. Because there's no erasing when you're writing with ink, and so there's no real erasing when you are embroidering either. There was a passage that I was going to read to you. This feels very story time, like I'm shaking out my newspaper to share with you. But this is a short passage that I'll share about coincidence itself. Coincidence itself is a kind of underlining. I've had the experience so many times of hearing a word in the world at the same instant my eyes pass over that word in a book, and the word is imbued with a new significance. Who hasn't had the experience of learning a new word and afterwards reading it or hearing it everywhere? Would I have spent as much time mulling over the absurdity of the existence of the phrase white slavery if I hadn't read it in 2 books in a row? I honestly can't fathom the audacity of a worldview that allows for such a phrase to come into regular usage. And I really did read 2 books in a row that included the phrase white slavery. So sometimes you have to look out for a genre fiction for that too. It can be a little distasteful to read a whole lot of mystery novels back to back. There's a lot of gender-based violence that comes up in these types of books. And so in some way too, anytime that I limit myself to a genre, the book that I write becomes a critique of that genre for sure. Another sort of absurd thing that I'm coming across here on page 19 is that in one of the stories that I read, drugs are smuggled into the city by way of Russian nesting dolls. And the image of that is so perfect to me. This idea that the police exhaust themselves by trying to find the drugs within the nesting dolls. They just can't make it to the center. It's like it flummoxes them. The idea that would be something that would deter the police or or drug dogs. You could just hide it at the center of too many nesting dolls and wear them down. It's an image that I still enjoy thinking about. That kind of, this is the book. There's still more pages here. I will, let's see, pick out another trompe l'oeil page where the page is sort of ripped out of the book. And that is the case of the isolated seamstress.
Is that my cue?
I think so. Yeah, I sort of exhausted myself or something, but I'm very happy to answer questions.
Well, I definitely have questions. I'll just put it out there. Anybody watching right now, if you have questions or comments, now's a great time to put them in the chat and I'll get them. Did I see one actually? Nope. Not yet, but I have some. Okay.
Okay, cool.
I have a lot of little ones. And I can help you remember them, but I'll just like put them all in a row. Is this your own handwriting that you use? And then do you write this on the fabric first and then stitch on top? And let's see, since you work in the unique book form only, I think, or at least we're talking about these books, the series, how can people find your work to see it if they really wanted to hold it, just to view it? Do you catalog these digitally anywhere, like page by page? And then lastly, well, this is a comment that I just wanted to say, the design of the book, meaning that it's but the design of the book, that it's like they're dime store notebooks, you know, things that we're all, I mean, more or less we've seen before. We know they don't cost very much. It's so understated. And yet I've literally never shown anybody one of your books without them exhibiting a physical manifestation of astonishment. So the question in that comment is, where does that come from? Where does that aesthetic come from? Where does that choice come from? And maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Well, I do use my own handwriting, and you are correct in intuiting that I write directly on the page and then stitch over that. In order to make a facsimile of a printed page, I use a wintergreen transfer. And so I have to enlarge the page and reverse it. And it's a process where you do a rubbing using wintergreen oil. You're welcome to anyone who has questions about how to do that. I'm happy to share more about that recipe for doing that. I know I get a lot of questions from embroiderers because I'm a little bit I've done a lot of embroidery, but I don't know anything about the art of embroidery really, except what I have sort of gleaned through my own mistakes. But to come back to that idea of where the books can be found, thank you to Booklyn. They can be found in quite a few public collections and university collections. So there may be one near you that you don't know about. I have exhibitions from time to time where people can handle them. I recently had an exhibition in San Antonio where people could handle them, and I'll have an exhibition coming up in Dallas in August at Rotu Gallery. And I do have a website where you can see an archive of quite a few of the books. I don't currently have a way to page every book that is shared. Part of the problem with that, I think, is just that my photography setup has changed over the years. Working on a series for so long, it's really hard to have consistent photography of everything that all looks the same. But it's definitely something to aspire to make that a more democratic process and less of a special process. I don't only make unique one-of-a-kind books. I also enjoy making ephemera or books when my work falls kind of in two categories. So I have artist books, and on the other hand, I make interactive installations. And a lot of times, my installations, I want to include a lot of text. And so I will often distribute a book that visitors to the installation can take with them, but it is also sort of a guidebook for the installation experience. So I definitely love the two sides of a book, or the many things that a book can be, one of which is that it can be a sort of democratized multiple. So I love making those books that can be distributed and handed out. And the other part of your comment about this sort of familiarity of the dime store notebook, I think that that's one of the reasons that I'm drawn to that form, is because it's so infinite and in its possibilities. With the Common Thread series, I have found that I can create that pattern. This is sort of the pattern of a notebook in the form that we most commonly see it. But in the Common Thread series, I take that sort of repetitive pattern, and I usually use something from the subject matter of the book. So it might be like a pattern of monkeys, or slices of cake, or snakes, or something that came up in the text of the book. And so I really like that there's like this endless. So every once in a while, I think, oh, I should make the pattern Fruit Loops, and then I have to ask myself, like, oh, have I ever done a Fruit Loop pattern? I'm not 100% sure, so I have to think about that. But I think there's something sort of delightful about an object or an image that is both familiar, but then just different from the way that we've seen it. So it has that kind of push-pull aspect to it.
That's great. Thank you. I have a couple comments I just want to channel your way, and then I have one question. Richard says, so fabulous. And Robin says, thank you so much, Candace, fascinating. Jan has a question. How do you choose which coincidence threads to follow? I imagine there are so many coincidences you may experience.
That's true. And a lot of my friends and colleagues save coincidences for me. One thing that you may notice when you start to collect your coincidences or share them too much with people is that everyone always thinks that their own coincidences are way more fascinating than yours. And so I feel like I have a pretty high threshold. My most recent one, last week, I read 2 books in a row, a book of essays by the novelist John Green, and a really brilliant book that I highly recommend called Having and Being Had about capitalism, also a book of essays. Both of these books, I just happened to pick them up at random, and both of them shared the story of the original inventor of the game Monopoly. The woman who invented Monopoly invented it as a game to teach children about the evils of capitalism. And both books included the detail that that this woman that invented Monopoly also very famously offered herself up for sale to the highest bidder in a newspaper advertisement, which she did as a sort of dark humor joke about marriage and women's place in society. That, as a coincidence, is a really good one. If you read both of those little tidbits in 2 books in a row, chosen at random, I defy anyone to find one that's quite that good. And that happens to me all the time. So I think it can happen to you too. We probably all have our sort of like private share of coincidences or coinkydinks or whatever you choose to call them, serendipities. But yeah, I'm like, sometimes I just go running through my house like yelling, I have the best job in the world. Like since it's a job I made for myself to record these things.
So now I have to ask, do you think that they're coincidences? And because it seems as human beings, one of the things we're great at is making connections between things. Sometimes that where there is no connection, sometimes there is a connection, sometimes there's coincidence, sometimes there's correlation, and then there's causality, and there's all these things in between. Are you ever compelled to venture beyond the acknowledgement that they're coincidences into some other territory, or is that where you like them to stay?
Well, so I hesitate. This is just such a big question about like the nature of the universe. And so I will point you to a series of books that I made about this topic. They're called String Theory. And those books are in 3 volumes. And with that series, it's another series that's also this larger format, because I really needed to be expansive about this. But obviously string theory is one of the theories to explain sort of the nature of the universe. And so I took that as I also really like stupid puns, like common thread, string theory in my own books. So I'm not above a stupid pun. But in those books, I really explore the way that we attach meaning to mundane things, and everything from like the scientific to the spiritual. And I personally think I can boil it down to the idea that as human beings, we like to tell stories, and you kind of have to fixate on certain details when you're trying to tell a story, because you literally can't describe everything that's going on around you all at the same time. And so I kind of think coincidences are a little bit of a handle that we grab onto to sort of make sense of things. And I think that's enough, narratively speaking.
Candace, thank you so much for spending time with us. I'm just going to check in. Okay, so we got all the comments and questions. I do want to share a few pieces with everyone real quick. Again, here's the way you can get in touch with Candace, or just follow her on Instagram, Candace Hicks Art. You can also check out CandaceHicks.com. I think there's in your website, they can find the string theory series. And is that different from notes for a string theory?
Yes, the notes for string theory are individual panels, more like paintings.
Gotcha. Okay, and that is a perfect segue, because here we go. I just created this quick link. If you want to see everything that is in Bookland's inventory, actually it's everything that we have, or maybe some of them that have sold out. There are so many amazing books. I mean, Candace was talking about the patterns from the cover. Just go to this link and you're going to see like over 20, maybe even 30 books, and they all they're all different. They're all so unique. They're all incredible. And we do our best to photograph them well enough that you can actually see a lot of detail. So check that out. I'm sorry, I have allergies right now. And I guess the last thing we want to know is, you told us about your exhibition coming up. Is there anything next for you in terms of what you're working on? Any global sort of changes that you're making? And yes, like what's next?
Well, so I'm really excited to be part of the opening of the new space for women in their work, a long-running nonprofit here in Texas, in Austin, Texas. They are officially opening their new space this summer. So I'm excited to be a part of that. I'll be at an event for that on July 10th. So check out Women in Their Work in Austin. And yeah, just plugging away and making some books and reading some books. Summer is a great time for reading, so enjoy.
Well, thank you so much again for sharing everything with us, Candace. And you can get in touch with Candace at Candace Hicks Art. At Candace Hicks Art. Once again, you can find things about Booklyn at Booklyn Art or booklyn.org, where you can also check out the lineup for the continuation of my favorite book, which is going to go through June 30th. And tomorrow evening at 7, we have Evgenia Kim, who's going to talk to us about her favorite book from Philadelphia. Stay tuned. Bye,
Thank
Candace.
you so much. I just want to thank everybody at Booklyn so much. Hugs.
Hugs back.
Bye.
Bye.